Hey guys, for today's writing workshop mini lesson, we're going to be talking about the individual proofreading list. I teach this lesson now because eventually you're going to be ready to edit your free verse poetry. And this is going to walk you through that process and kind of what we're looking for and what I'm expecting from you as a proofreader. So I'm going to go ahead and do that lesson with you. You'll notice that there's nothing to turn in, but this lesson still needs to be completed. You just don't have anything to turn in. So you can click on the resource, which is the presentation of the lesson. I'm going to go ahead and click present. So I know many of you don't have your ELA reference folders or your writing and process folders with you at home, but this is still relevant because when we get back to school, you will be ready to get started with this step very quickly. So you'll understand the process and you'll be able to complete this without any assistance after this lesson, hopefully. So when you turn to your writing and process folder, you see this page is the very first page of that folder. And it actually doesn't look just like this because you've written your name here. And then I have typed in 4 things that you're going to be proofreading for. But this is where we're going to get what we edit for. So when we start paying attention to the things that there are rules about, this is where we're going to go to get those rules. Now let's talk conventions. By the way, conventions are those things that there are rules about. And there's a reason why there are rules about that. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now. Readers' eyes and minds are well trained. As readers, we've learned to bring specific expectations to written text when a piece of writing doesn't match our expectations as readers, we're thrown. So like when you're reading your novels or your independent reading books, I'm sure by 5th grade, you've come across a typo or an error in the text in a published work. And when this happens, I've had students do this in my classroom as we're reading. They kind of become indignant that there's an error in this published work. So they'll come up and they'll say, look, there's a mistake in this book. Can you believe this? That's because as readers, we've come to expect that everything we read will be conventional and it will be organized in a certain way. So when that happens, what we do is we stop reading and we pay attention to the error. And so since we are writers, we have to be conscious of this because if there are enough typos or errors in the work that we create, we need to be aware that people are not going to read our work. Even though we have really important things to say or meaningful things to share, if we don't organize it and write conventionally, then it's not going to matter what is on that page because readers are not going to stick with it. They're going to abandon it the same way we would if we were reading something that contained a lot of errors, because our brain is going to tell us, stop, don't do this, put this down, this is not good stuff. And it might be, it's just not conventional. And so it's really important to be aware of that. The reason that our brains tell us that is because our eyes and brains have learned that texts are supposed to contain certain features and look certain ways. In fact, it's this predictable conventionality that makes reading possible. So what does this mean? Sorry, I'm going to put myself here. What does this mean for writers? Well, if your writing is misspelled, research shows it takes as few as 5 or 6 misspellings in a 300-word text before readers will say, I can't read this. If your short story consists of one long paragraph, so I've seen this a lot actually. I've seen a whole page of text and only one paragraph. So that means only one indent. So if your short story consists of one long paragraph, a reader won't want to attempt it. Their brain will freeze up once they get a gander at that text and realize that there are no breathing spaces, no places to rest and regroup. Because that's why we have paragraphs in the first place. It's a way of organizing our text so that our readers' brains can process and group the information found in that paragraph, and then they can hang on to it and understand it. If you were writing an essay and it doesn't have sufficient periods at the ends of the sentences, a reader may start it, but without some signals about what to do with their voice as they read or how to chunk the text, they'll soon abandon it. If your free verse poem looks like a prose paragraph, your reader will read it as a prose paragraph. So much for poetry. I pushed out a template for you guys when you wrote your first draft, and I organized it in lines and stanzas because we need to write poetry in lines and stanzas so that we can read that poetry as it was meant to be read. If we put our poem into the form of paragraphs, people are going to read it as if they're reading a story. And I think you guys have read enough poetry to know that there's a big difference between poetry and regular text. By the way, that's what prose is. You'll see that word, and I use that word a lot. Prose is regular writing. Poetry is its own genre, so there are different rules about organizing it. But if we're just talking about regular text and everyday writing, we're going to call that prose. Okay, jumping back in. Readers aren't snobs or judges, and they aren't lazy, but they do need all the help they can get, especially with written English. Readers need conventionality for writers to hold up their end of the written language agreement. Readers count on writers to follow the rules and observe the forms. Otherwise, we can't act as readers. As writers, we follow the rules and observe the forms so our writing will be read, so it will be understood as we intend, so it will be taken seriously, and so we won't appear ignorant or arrogant. This year, in many lessons and individual editing conferences, I'll teach you the conventions of writing that will help you hold up your end of the reader-writer bargain and be read, recognized, responded to, and respected as writers. Your individual proofreading list is the place where you'll keep track of errors or omissions that show up in your writing that you need to watch out for as you draft and edit. After today, you'll make an entry on this list only after you and I have an editing conference. That is, after I've read your writing and identified a convention that you need to know, and after I've taught you about the rule or form in an editing conference. Today we'll start the list with 4 common entries. Again, these are the only 4 conventions I'll ask you to focus on. After this, as I start editing your work, your list will reflect your personal goals as an editor or proofreader. For example, I've told you guys from the very beginning that in 5th grade we work in workshops, and that means individual to you. So like your learning is going to look a little different from the person next to you because you're at a different place in the learning process. I feel like that's the best way to teach reading and writing because we are very different as readers and writers, and we have different strengths and different weaknesses, and it doesn't make sense for me to teach the same thing to everybody because everybody doesn't need the same thing. So by working in a workshop setting, that allows me to teach you exactly what you need and the next person exactly what they need. In order to do that, we have to have a partnership though. Once I teach you something, you have to do your very best to try and hang on to that knowledge and then to apply it to your writing. And that includes the conventions or editing. So the 4 things that I want everyone to do, because I feel like everyone should be able to do this, is to edit for these 4 conventions. So the first thing we put on our individual proofreading list is obvious stuff. My sentence is perfect. That poster hangs in every single room in our school from kindergarten on. So from kindergarten, you have been taught that every sentence starts with a capital letter and it ends with punctuation, and that you put space between each word in that sentence. Obvious stuff is that kind of stuff. The stuff that you know, but maybe don't always do. I see tons of sentences, especially on vocab quizzes, where you have to write your own sentence that don't start with a capital letter, do not end with punctuation. I see it over and over and over. So that's obvious stuff. That's stuff we ought to be doing and we know we should be doing. So you're going to check for those kinds of things. Circle and look up every word I'm not 100% certain of. Listen, you may not know the correct spelling for a word, but I can promise you that your brain, when it reads words, will tell you, hey, I don't think this is right. It just looks funny to you. And so when that happens, you're going to circle that word in your text, and you're not going to leave what you're doing. You're not going to leave editing to go and look that word up right now. You're just going to circle it, and then you're going to use some of the strategies that I teach you to check your spelling, and you'll come back to it. And sometimes you'll find, yes, that is indeed spelled correctly, and sometimes you won't. But this is what I'm expecting from you. You'll circle and look up every single word that you're not 100% certain that is spelled correctly. The third thing is to capitalize your first, last, and important words in a title. Okay? A title is not a sentence. It doesn't have the same rules. So this is the rule I want you to apply to your titles. And then the last thing, again, I see this a ton from fifth graders. You need to capitalize the personal pronoun I. If you are using the letter I as a word in a sentence, it is always going to be capitalized. Whether it is the first word in a sentence or the last, or if it's in the middle, it's always going to be capitalized because it is being used as a name. Okay? That is, you don't capitalize every personal pronoun, but you do the letter I. And so that is something I'm going to expect you to edit for also. So from today on, every time you're ready to edit a piece of your writing, you'll copy these 3 conventions onto an editing check sheet. I'm going to show you what that is. These are kept in the classroom. I'm probably going to develop a digital version since we don't really know if we're going to be in a virtual learning model or an in-person or a hybrid. And so just to make sure that all the bases are covered, I will probably be creating a digital one that we can use with our work. But you will go and get this. You'll fill in your name, you'll fill in the title, and you'll fill in the date that you're editing this. And then you will copy the things from your proofreading list. And as you saw, yours has 4 already typed for you. You will copy those things to your editing check sheet. And then you'll go back into your piece of text or your work, and you'll edit for one thing at a time. So you'll go through and you'll look for obvious stuff. You'll look to see if you capitalized your sentences. You'll look to see if you punctuated. You'll look to see if you use paragraphing, if it's a short story or if it's prose. If it's not, then you're going to look for stanzas and lines. If it's poetry, if you wrote a drama, you're going to make sure that it's organized as a drama. So that's the obvious stuff that we're talking about. Then you'll go on and you'll edit for spelling, and you'll circle and look up every word I'm not 100% certain of. You're going to do these things one at a time. You're not going to look for all of this stuff at once. And then you're going to put a check mark in the box to tell me that you did indeed do that. And then there's a spot on the editing checklist for me to make comments. Almost always, if I have a suggestion for your work, I'm going to write it in the teacher comments. I'm not going to write on your actual work, because what I find is when I start doing that, then that piece becomes mine, and that's not how writing workshop is supposed to work. It's supposed to be about you expressing your ideas and thoughts, and not you being influenced by my ideas and thoughts. So I may offer suggestions here, but they are simply that, suggestions. You are free to take it or leave it. Obviously, it doesn't make sense for you not to take a suggestion if it would improve your work. So, I mean, it's always up to you. Learning is a choice. It's always up to you whether you want to get better or stronger as a writer or reader. And so those suggestions are there to help you do that. But again, you always have the choice and the voice in this classroom. And then obviously, there are going to be times that we notice that you're misspelling certain words. And if we do, then we're going to put them here so that we can remember to add them to our PSL, because that's how spelling works in 5th grade. We want to make sure that these are words that we're using in our writing and that we're applying what we've learned. So if we're not seeing that being applied, or if we're seeing words misspelled in your writing, then obviously we need to give our brain some time to visually memorize that. So we'll do that so that can happen. And that is it. Hopefully, this information will become more relevant as we get to this part in the writing process with our poetry. Love you guys and miss you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you soon.